All right, well, welcome back to another episode of Dangerous Dogma, and I'm excited to be joined once again with Beau and Angela as we think about some things that have been happening in the world these days. So welcome back.
Good to be back.
Yeah, good to see you all again.
So let's open up again and just remind everyone who we are. And I also thought that since we're here in Advent, we could maybe say something that we're excited about, or that we're looking forward to at Advent at your local church or some other context. And so I'm Brian Kaylor, the host of Dangerous Dogma and president of Word&Way. And this coming Sunday is the annual Christmas cantata at my church. And I'm looking forward to that. I play the cello. And so we've been working through the music for a couple of months now, and it's actually coming together. So I'm excited.
You have so many hidden talents, Brian. I love that. I played trumpet, but nobody wants to hear me play that anymore. That was strictly the first couple of years of high school. So I'm Angela Denker. I'm a Lutheran pastor, author of Red State Christians and Disciples of White Jesus. And I serve as pastor of visitation and public theology at Lake Nokomis Lutheran in Minneapolis. And as a Lutheran of German and Scandinavian descent, we love Advent. I grew up getting Advent presents from my grandma, and she would buy them at the flea market in the Midwest, and they would be sent to us. And my brother and I would unwrap all this kind of crazy, interesting stuff. So with my kids, I'm going to share something from at home, actually, because I think Advent is a great time to create some home traditions. I always, as a pastor, encouraged families to find a way to have like an Advent wreath at home, and you can light the candles each week. In my family, my mom was a PK, so she was an overachiever, and she had us do Advent every single night. That was, a little much. So we do it on Sunday nights, but my kids like it, and we just kind of turn off all the lights, light a couple candles. I will pick some kind of reading that relates to the theme of the week. So this week we read Jesus' words about my peace I leave with you. We'll sing some kind of song, which doesn't always go that great. And then my kids pick a character from the nativity scene that they think relates to the theme of that week. So this week, everybody picks something with peace. So it's a tradition and something I really always enjoy.
Yeah, I like that. So I do not play any musical instruments, but I am Beau Underwood, a Disciples of Christ pastor in Indianapolis, Indiana, and a contributing editor to Word&Way. For me as a pastor, it's always the struggle. Advent comes around, and it's that hope, peace, joy, love, and it feels like it can become so rote, and it's just going through the motions of lighting the candles again, and yet that's the rhythm that at least my congregation and so many mainline churches are used to. So I'm always trying to figure out how to live into that rhythm and yet do something creative and new and different. And so this year we're using as our sermon text, in addition to a scripture passage, a hymn that reflects on one of those themes. So like this last week we used I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day and talked about the tensions of violence and peace in our world. We'll do Joy to the World next week and talk about how it's not really a Christmas hymn, which always blows people's minds. It's like that debate over whether Die Hard is a Christmas movie or not. Is Joy to the World a Christmas hymn or not? So I've really enjoyed that. My congregations love learning kind of the background to these hymns. And of course, it just is right for lots of connections with what's going on in the world today and some of these stories behind how these hymns were created.
So I thought Die Hard was an Advent movie because they're all waiting and waiting for someone to come save them.
Well,
I think given the premise of the Christmas party, it is absolutely a Christmas movie. I will die on this hill.
Isn't some of that filmed in Minneapolis too? So I gotta stand behind that. But Beau, your congregation must also not have the quintessential argument of, the fact that we should not be singing Christmas hymns in Advent. Have you guys heard about that debate in some churches?
Yeah, so my music director is really good on this, and I just back him to the hilt. But we do get some of that. But again, with these hymns, we've played with that a little bit. Like we did O Come, Emmanuel for the first week for Hope. So the Advent hymns are something we're drawing on as well as part of this.
Yeah, no, I love it.
Yeah. So I guess it's ironic then the first topic we're going to talk about today in the news is the opposite of the theme of peace, because we've got a lot of saber rattling that's happening, as well as actual military strikes off the coast of Venezuela and Colombia on boats. There's a lot of questions about who's actually being killed in the strikes and allegations of violations of international war crimes and laws on that. And the Pope has come out suggesting that we shouldn't invade Venezuela. The Catholic Archbishop of the Archdiocese for Military Services has come out even stronger in arguing against an invasion, which the Trump administration has kind of hinted at. So I want to talk about religion in the Pentagon in a moment, but I think we should also just open up of like what's even happening right now, because it's one of those weird moments where it feels like we're going through all of the rhetoric in the march up to the Iraq War, which ended so poorly, only with less defined even reason as to why we would launch an invasion of Venezuela at this moment.
Yeah, it's so illogical in my mind, right? We want there to be a rational premise behind what the government or the military does, and it's not clear at all what the logic here is. It almost seems like this is Marco Rubio's war of choice, and Pete Hegseth is going along with him because strategically it's not a key area of the world that we are worried about a threat arising from. The idea that this is drug related is a farce because fentanyl is coming from Mexico, cocaine is coming from Honduras, and we just pardoned the former president of Honduras that did do lots of damage to our country in terms of the amount of drugs flowing in that he helped make possible. So this all feels like it's pretext for some other agenda that we aren't aware of and aren't being told about, and it's just shocking the amount of resources and the amount of the level of threat that we're at, given what seems like such an inconsequential country in terms of geopolitics and national security.
Well, I think Timothy Snyder had an important post on this talking about these strikes as analogous to creating a context of war, right? And even looking back to, which is always a fraught comparison, but the 1930s Germany land war that creates the conditions of chaos and fear and violence. And so I think the hidden agenda, which is maybe not so hidden, is creating a context in the U.S. of chaos, uncertainty, violence, fear. But I think that the other piece of this too is that I think most Americans have not fully reckoned with the role that the U.S. has played in South America and Latin America in general, and Central America, of regime change, supposed democracy promotion, and that is relevant as we're also watching, and here in Minneapolis especially, backlash against immigrants and ICE raids impacting, there's been a lot of press about Somalians, but also here in the U.S. I just heard this morning, right in our neighborhood, neighbor's daughter's friend's father was just picked up by ICE and was here legally from Central America, has a legal visa, but is now away from his family for the holidays. And I think the context of that history is just important because it reveals the different ways that people view America and American government's role. And then also when we get into religion, then talking about the response of liberation theology, and specifically in that vein of Catholicism, which certainly influenced Pope Francis, and I think Pope Leo as well, looking at why liberation theology arose in response, in part, to some of the U.S. government's actions in South and Central America.
Yeah, I mean, it really is stunning the history we don't know. I mentioned the Iraq War because that's the more recent one, but our numerous regimes that we have overthrown, often overthrowing democratically elected leaders, like in Guatemala, that sparked a deadly civil war for decades, and then backing violent, oppressive, dictators who are torturing and killing their own people, all for whatever matched our anti-communist agenda, and really even usually more so our money-making agenda in the region.
Yeah, I think, and I guess what gives me hope is, I just preached about this on Sunday, and I said, you would think, given the events of the last 20 years, certainly going back even longer than that, decades in terms of Latin America and South America, that there might be a little more humility by the American public towards what we're doing. And I mean, this sounds awful to say. I don't see this polling well, right? I don't think anybody is rallying behind this and going, Maduro's not a great human being. I wouldn't want him to be leading my country. And yet he's far from the worst actor on the global stage, right? And so I just don't know that the American public is going to be really excited, especially when President Trump ran on a an isolationist platform, right? So this just seems such a contradiction in terms of what he is supposedly all about. He's going to have half the country against him to start with in terms of the Democrats, and then he's going to have a portion of his own base. Like, this feels like it's going to be a very fractional part of the country that would cheer this on, and yet it doesn't seem like public opinion's stopping them at all, which is a scary place to be.
Yeah. And so let's talk about the religion side of this, because I think that's, obviously we're concerned about just the idea of war in general here, but I'm really bothered by how faith is being used. Our faith is being used to justify all of this. So we want to kind of bring in a couple pieces of conversation. I'll introduce the first one, and Beau, why don't you summarize? You found the second one, and have a conversation here about this, because I reported last week at a public witness about the Pentagon prayer services that have been happening every month under Hegseth's rule there. There was a lot of attention to the first one in May. Several media outlets covered it, and then no one's been paying attention to it since then. And so I found out who had preached at all of the monthly events since then, which has been 3 Southern Baptist pastors, a grandson of Billy Graham, and a former NFL player who's been accused of insider trading. And so a very odd choice for filling the pulpit. And then the next one's going to be next week, the Christmas one with Franklin Graham, a big Trump backing evangelical and son of Billy Graham, will be the preacher at the Christmas gathering. And so religion is being infused here in everything that Hegseth is doing. He's framing his leadership, his decisions as part of God's plan. The Department of War has been running videos with Bible verses put on top of images of the U.S. military flying fighter jets and firing missiles and soldiers shooting. And so he's very much, if we go to war in Venezuela, it's going to be framed as a bit of a holy crusade by the Secretary of War, who has a crusader tattoo on him. And then, also even just the strikes are being justified as, this is what we do. We're God's agents of vengeance against, narco terrorists. And we need to always put that in quote marks. But then, yet, despite all of that, there was also an argument in the New York Times that Hegseth needs to bring more religion into his public policy.
Brian, I just want to clarify what you've reported on here. I assume that given the diversity of the troops in the U.S. military, that there's also been a Jewish rabbi, a Muslim imam, a humanist chaplain, that they've also preached at some of these services. Is that correct? I mean, it's not even.
Yeah, right. You joke, but it's like, it's sad. There's not even diversity within the Christian tradition, right? Like, all 6 preachers so far, and 7 if we count Franklin Graham coming up next week, all 7 are from a very narrow slice of ultra right-wing, highly patriarchal Christianity. I mean, this is the Christianity that all of us have written about, but, Angela, disciples of white Jesus, like, they're all from that, like, vein of Christianity. It's not even the diversity of Christianity, let alone the greater religious diversity of our military, and none of the preachers have been chaplains. And I know, Beau, this is, what you're doing your dissertation on, is thinking about the role of chaplains. And military chaplains approach ministry very different than an evangelist coming in, or even a pastor. It's a very different level of training, and it's a different kind of ministry job. But let's talk about the New York Times. You want to introduce that piece, Beau?
Yeah, and Joe, I'm really curious, as Brian, to hear your thoughts too on this kind of the strand of Christianity, given your book on this. I think you have a lot to inform this conversation. But let me just add in this piece. I don't know if you all saw this, by Russ Douthat, about this idea that, the Trump administration is getting critiqued for bringing Christian nationalism, and the problem is that there's too much nationalism, not enough Christian. And if we could just, bring Christian morals into the government when it comes to Venezuela, when it comes to some of the stuff, well, we would get a better behaved government. And basically, as you read the critique, it's that they're using Christianity as a way of a veneer of justifying what they're doing. If they would just get serious about being Christian, we'd be fine. And again, I share his critique, or I just share his diagnosis. I don't share his prescription, right? I mean, this idea that if only the Trump administration would be a little more Christian, all would be well in the world. One, I don't think that they're serious about doing that, but I also don't think that's the solution in a religiously pluralistic society, is that if we just got, if Pete Hegseth would just listen to Franklin Graham a little bit more, all would be well. I think that, the cause and effect relationship is run the other way, right? Where Pete Hegseth is bringing Graham in to justify what he's already doing. And I think Douthat's piece is just a little bit illogical and backwards, you might say.
Well, is there any institution or group of folks that has done more to promote the spread and the disinformation about Christian nationalism in this country than the religion writers and columnists at the New York Times? I don't know. And speaking of a lack of religious diversity, when is the last time that the New York Times has published a religious perspective that does not come from a white evangelical or a white Catholic? It's really frustrating because even with the decline of national media outlets, the New York Times still carries a weight of opinion and influence in this country. And I think the broader thing that pieces like Do That's do is it just increases cynicism and nihilism among younger Americans about religion in general. That if this is what religion is comprised of, we want nothing to do with it. And even for, younger people who may be like, okay, I'm in for Trump, I'm in for the, masculinity and power and strength that's supposedly offered by Hegseth and Vance, they still don't want anything to do with religion, to Brian's point that it's Hegseth who's driving the bus. It's the nationalism that's driving the bus. And it reminds me of one of the quotes that I first heard when I was researching Christian nationalism way back in 2018 from a Southern Baptist pastor is that they understand that when the politics come into conflict with the religious principles, which kind of gets at what we're talking about here, the politics win. The Christianity loses out. And that's why you're seeing quote unquote worship services for the U.S. military that look more like a campaign rally. And worship services that say nothing about, Jesus being born to parents who were likely undocumented, that Jesus is wandering with his parents to go and register for a census, that they don't have any safe place for Mary to give birth. The Christmas story itself speaks so powerfully against this demonization of migrants, of immigrants, and of poor people. So we're really in an interesting place in this country and really in a place where we desperately need an alternative witness to these broad, powerful voices that are claiming to speak for God and for Jesus.
Yeah, Angela, everything you just said there, it's like, yes, this only makes the work of Christianity in the United States harder in terms of congregations trying to attract people into this way of life. And again, I think military service is a very honorable thing. My wife's a Navy vet. And there is no universe in which I could imagine if Jesus was walking our streets today that the place he's going to show up is at a worship service at the Pentagon, right? I mean, that's just not where he's going to be hanging out, spending his time, given his, the empire, the context of empire which he was born into and pushed back against. I mean, this is just not where you would expect Jesus to show up. And the idea that we're baptizing what they're doing inside the Pentagon with this Christian nationalism, Christianese, is just scary in terms of the compromise it reflects of the gospel and the damage it does to the church's witness.
Yeah, and I find it so fascinating what seems to prove the danger of Christian nationalism being codified into a government, because his argument is that we need more Christianity, but what it is, one, it shows he hasn't been paying attention to Hegseth, who not only is he leading these prayer services, he regularly makes soldiers bow their heads and join him in prayer, which in a hierarchy like the military, they don't really have the option to not at least pretend to be participating with him. Like, he's bringing religion in, but Duthoff seems to think that, well, the problem is we don't hear him talking about a just war theology. So it's really that he thinks that there's only one version of Christianity that should be showing up in the Pentagon, when there's a pacifist side, there was Hegseth's Crusader theology. And so that's the whole problem here, is what Christianity, if we have a Christian nationalism at the Pentagon or other parts of the government, which Christianity is it? Not only are we now leaving out Jews and Hindus and Buddhists and atheists and others, but you're going to leave out big chunks of the Christian tradition. And so, Duthoff, if he were in charge, then there would be other Christians that are complaining. And so I think he inadvertently, he doesn't realize he did it, but he just proved why Christian nationalism is so fraught and doesn't work, is because it codifies one narrow interpretation of the faith.
And what I see from folks like him so often is that they fail to remove the log from their own eye. There's no reckoning with the really violent and dangerous history of when Christianity, even by folks espousing just war, has been used to promote violence on behalf, even if we look back at things like Manifest Destiny, if we look back at the treatment of Indigenous Americans, the arguments for rounding up Native American children into boarding schools. It doesn't reckon with any of that history, even to say, okay, if we think that Christianity is an appropriate ideology to use to understand when we should engage in war as a nation. It's just totally vacant. I also wanted to reflect on something else, but I forgot. So go ahead, Beau.
The Iraq War was sold. You said this idea of just war. I mean, even the Iraq War was sold by the Southern Baptist Convention as a just war. And it often seems like that theology seems to just shrug at, well, it's just war. No, who cares?
Yeah, and the danger of this in terms of rhetorically what this does, again, I think we're very aware of this, but it's just important to remind ourselves of this. It's the sacralizing of the military action. So now, if you're against these, strikes against these boats in international waters, you're somehow, working against the will of God or something, like to that effect, because it's God's blessing what's going on there. Again, I'm not supportive at all of drugs becoming the United States, but we have a way to handle these boats. We know where they are. We go interdict them. We arrest the people. We try to work up the food chain and try to stop the source of the drugs. I mean, this is a terrible strategy for actually solving the drug crisis, but now we're giving it the veneer of religion and claiming that the Pentagon is God's vessel in taking out these terrible people. And that's very unhelpful in actually dealing with the policy issue. So it's dastardly on multiple fronts.
I remembered what I wanted to say. And I thought of it when Beau mentioned about your wife being a veteran. What makes me sad about this whole situation is the huge costs that we ask from our military service people. And then this is what we're giving them as justification. This is what we're giving them as inspiration. This is what we're giving them as religion. It speaks to the fact that we don't have a military chaplain who's been specifically trained to minister, hopefully, to service people, leading these services. And I think about the folks I know who are currently on active duty. In many cases, it's people coming from rural America. It's people coming from poor families. It's people who have represented, in many cases, the best of America, and then are also thrown at very young ages into really difficult situations. What do you do as a service person if you're the one who's asked to push that button and I know the commands come from higher up, but still, the weight of remote killings on individual service people and what we're asking, the burdens that we're continually asking our service members to bear without giving any kind of access to appropriate pastoral care, appropriate spiritual care, and then also layering that on for military service members who aren't Christian, who are then being drawn into this. I mean, I just think of the fallout for veterans for the rest of their lives. And I've seen this for veterans in my own family. It's a huge burden to bear. And I think that's a human piece of it that we really have to consider when we talk about the military service, the military leadership decisions at large.
And of course, these concerns we have about the way the military is being used and the Christian nationalism at the Pentagon is not happening in a vacuum either, in the sense that we've got this debate right now about whether soldiers should follow unlawful orders or not, right? And of course, if the Secretary of Defense is the one issuing those orders and he's being prayed over and blessed and whatever, well, then how can those orders be unlawful? Because he's a man of God, right? So there's just this, like you said, Angela, these soldiers on the front lines are being put in these almost impossible situations because the norms and procedures and policies and laws that have so structured our military for a very long time are just being eroded almost overnight here. And Christianity is being used to justify it.
It is. I want to share an example. I didn't share this one with you all ahead of time, so I want to, in case you didn't see it, I want to get your fresh reaction. New York Times had an article where they just asked several Republicans what they think about these strikes, and particularly the allegations of them violating international war laws. And there was a Republican in Texas who she was defending the strikes, and she made a Christian argument for this. And this is what the story says about her argument. She said she compared these strikes to a story in the Bible when Jesus healed someone on a Sunday, contradicting religious rules that forbid work on that day. Some laws are worth breaking for the betterment of mankind, she said, just like the biblical story was trying to show.
I mean, I'm astounded at the way we will warp our faith to justify our politics, right? The tribalism that's at play in our political life, and the way that our side can do no wrong and the other side can do no good. And I'm also amazed at the lack of biblical literacy there, right? To not understand the story and to not be able to differentiate between religious laws and, like, you know, how different those were back then compared to the laws that govern the military today. It's just profoundly ignorant.
I think I did see that. And my just first immediate thought was, Jesus is healing. He's healing. We are killing people. Those two things are not the same. And so but it does speak to the ways that Christian nationalism has so infiltrated people's understanding of who Jesus is and what American Christianity is, that we can equate an American military action of killing people with Jesus' action of healing people. That those are the same thing, because justifiably anything that America does is an act of God and is righteous if we are living in a Christian nationalist country.
Yeah, it'd be hard pressed to find an example where someone has more totally flipped the moral of the story from, Jesus saying, going to understand what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, and let me heal someone on a Sunday. And then like someone clearly who does not understand what that means. And I don't know, if only there was a book about, how Christian nationalists are misusing the Bible or something.
Can we just point out that we are on this charge in our country to put the Ten Commandments everywhere? Can somebody please post them somewhere at the Pentagon so we could get "Thou shalt not kill" in this conversation somewhere along the way? Is that possible?
That would be fun. I mean, with Hegseth, it might be good also have the not commit adultery one up there too. So, anyways, we should move on to our other topic that we wanted to talk about. I think we could spend more time here, but we really wanted to talk about AI. I want to talk about. I mean, AI is popping up everywhere, and there's a lot of uses of it where there's not enough debates. There's a lot of debates about it, but there's also a lot of people just embracing AI. I still am just stunned by how Google puts AI results at the top of their Google searches that are often just like wrong. Like Google is the best way of going to like find stuff on the internet, and then they're literally killing their product with their AI results at the top of the page that give you the opposite wrong information from what their product actually is displaying on the page. It just stuns me that they would undermine themselves like that. So I want to think about AI broadly, but particularly in church life, because we're seeing the rise of AI. There's several services now where you can AI chat or text with biblical characters, including Jesus. But I mean, which is like a whole level of fascinating blasphemy that we're just going to put words in Jesus' mouth. But I find it even weird to like be texting with like Peter or something, right? As if we're having a deep conversation there. One of them, my favorite one, there's you can text with Jesus for free, but you have to have a paid subscription to text with Satan. So that's like a bonus like upgrade. And then also, and we'll put links to all of the pieces that we've been talking about in this in the show notes. There's also a piece of Christianity Today talking about a new Christian music star topping the charts who is AI, not actually a Christian singer, just AI. So, they called it the soulless Christian star, right? And so there's a lot of other examples, but I just wanted to kind of get us rolling here and thinking about AI and how much it's infiltrating all of society, but now even, church and Christian life.
Yeah, I mean, we've really reached the bottom of the barrel when it comes to like art and creativity and beauty being turned into just total slop. I think I'm completely opposed to AI, especially as a writer, as a pastor. I can't stand it when I hear anybody using it. And my big question a lot of the time with it, I mean, this is clearly such a creation of the tech companies, and it almost, I mean, hopefully someday it'll be a movie. It's such a bubble.
It's called The Terminator.
Yeah. I mean, or, Frankenstein, I don't know. But it's such a bubble of like creating something unreal to create more work for more unreal things. In my spouse's field in engineering, so much of the work that they're doing and building is data center work. And that's a bubble that's going to eventually burst. Because I think, as you say, Brian, some of it's such poor quality. It's like, who wanted this? In social media sites, you'll get those, like, these are the AI recommendations, and nobody wanted that. Nobody needed it. I think of the newspaper here in Minnesota where I used to be a columnist. They were saying they didn't have enough money to really pay columnists a fair wage, but they did have enough money to do a big partnership with OpenAI and Google to have AI generated stories in the newspaper. We're just undermining ourselves. We're ultimately, we're undermining humanity. So I think this is just, peak, like, our civilization is headed for collapse. When you're going to text with Jesus, and Jesus is now a creation of the tech companies. I mean, we no longer have a God of the Bible. We have a God of capitalism. It's just really scary. And in church life, God, please don't do a sermon from AI. I mean, we already have enough problem getting people to want to come to our churches. AI sermons are not going to be the trick until I guess they are. Maybe that's what people want.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely with you all in the get off my lawn curmudgeon camp here. It seems to me like, again, when I've read this story, I preached a sermon about this too a few weeks ago about just the Jesus chatbot thing. Like, this is actual literal understanding of blasphemy, right? Is putting words, claiming words are gods that are not. And it just shows how superficial our religious life has become in this nation and in our church, that we don't care about blasphemy anymore, that like we aren't taking that seriously in any kind of a way. I did just type into ChatGPT the question, do you believe that Jesus Christ is your personal Lord and Savior? And the answer I got from ChatGPT is, I don't have personal beliefs, faith, or a spiritual life, so I don't have a personal Lord and Savior. So we need to do some work out there evangelizing the AI and making sure that it's going to be able to get into the kingdom of heaven. But yeah, it's how, tell me we've gone off the rails in terms of, like you said, Angela, like the commercialization of religion, in terms of the individualization of religion. I mean, tell me that we don't value the Christian tradition and the communal life that it's supposed to foster anymore. This Jesus chatbot thing is the best evidence I can find.
You were joking about that last part, and about trying to evangelize the AI, which is crazy then, right? So that means we really do have unsaved, godless AI chatbots that are then claiming to give us the words of Jesus. Did you all see Joe Rogan's comments about this? Joe Rogan was talking about how he said Jesus is born out of a virgin mother. What's more virgin than a computer? Suggesting that artificial intelligence could absolutely return as Jesus, not just in return as Jesus. The return of Jesus will be with all the powers of Jesus. So suggesting that AI could come back as Jesus because a computer is a virgin, and therefore that could be the second coming.
I mean, these are the thinkers we deserve. Like, this is the theology.
And his podcast is a little bit more popular than this one. So
right. Like, this is the theology we deserve. But also, the tech bros, like, they are being revealed in this too. I mean, Joe Rogan isn't a tech bro, but he aspires to be like one. They're being revealed for the wackiness of their beliefs. You see Peter Thiel going on tour talking about the Antichrist and the rapture and the end of the world. They have some really, really wacky, unbiblical ideas. And I do think that's why I do consistently tell mainline audiences, which I imagine is a lot of folks listening to this podcast, is don't give up on the Bible. Don't give up on ceding the ground of orthodoxy to more conservative Christians, because they have jumped the shark. The wacky ideas are now much in religion, much more firmly entrenched on the right than they are on the left. So in order to bring sanity back into Christianity, we need to conflate and deflate some of these ideas.
I'm glad you brought up the Peter Thiel stuff. I mean, I would just encourage anybody listening to this, you got to Google Peter Thiel and Christianity and see some of the just outlandish and wild things that he's saying. And he has every right to say them, but the problem is that people are listening, right? He's holding these private enclaves. He's expounding hours on end. He is trying to style himself this kind of religious, philosophical, technocratic giant here. And it's outlandish. And like I said, I won't speak for the two of you. Nobody should come to me to talk about technological innovation, right? I know nothing about it. I am not an expert in anything that Silicon Valley is doing on the cutting edge of technology. And nobody should be going to Elon Musk or Peter Thiel or whoever for religious advice, right? Because whatever else they are not religious gurus. They are not spiritual leaders. They have no formal training. They have no expertise. They are just people with a lot of money and a big platform who are using it to mock God and engage in blasphemy. And we should name that as such and reject that as such. And like you said, Angela, this is a place where the mainline tradition and frankly, all Christians of all stripes have traditions to rely upon. We have a story that's formed us for thousands of years, and we should be reminding people of that story.
I mean,
I think it's particularly fascinating that Thiel says that the Antichrist is going to be someone who's limiting AI, who's trying to stop AI from happening, which, if the Antichrist has anything, again, we'll punt on the theology of an Antichrist, but let's just take the dispensationist version of the Antichrist. That is always the left behind, all of those is always someone who's actually controlling the world with technology. It would be the AI would be more likely in that theology to lead to the rise of the Antichrist, as opposed to somehow the Antichrist is the person who's limiting AI. It's such a fascinating way of making the Antichrist his own capitalistic enemies. Like the people who are opposing his bottom line, they're the Antichrist.
Well, the warning here is just for my own denomination, for mainline churches, progressive Christian institutions, not to do like we do so many times and 5-10 years later, we're jumping on the bandwagon. Yeah. Peter Thiel, can you come address our, synod convention? Can we sign up for this? And I'm 40 years old. I grew up very much in the age where we idolized these guys. We idolized Mark Zuckerberg. We told the founder stories of the garage. We idolized Apple. And all of that is coming to roost now that we have really idolized money. And the outgrowth, if you look at the fruit, you look at these guys, they are not smart. And when it comes to philosophy, theology, they're great with technology. But when it comes to putting it all together for a worldview, it's not smart, it's not intelligent, and also they're miserable. They're not happy people. So I think we want something really different. And I know as a parent, I want something really different for my kids.
Well, and I think that there's a certain hedonism in that culture, right? I'm not saying everybody in the tech culture is that, not at all, but the point is there's definitely a sort of hedonism that is stereotypical of certain tech corners that, the Tim LaHaye's of the world spent a lot of time warning us against, right? And here we are, it's being realized in front of our eyes. And it's in our politics, it's in our culture, it's in some ways, the tech culture that Elon Musk and Peter Thiel have fostered. Pleasure is the highest pursuit. And it's not sacrifice, it's not a good life that involves living for others. The good life is defined as living for yourself.
Yeah, and before we move on from this segment, and we have to note that the good thing about AI now is, of course, now you can get Donald Trump AI voice reading you Bible stories.
For those who are listening, Brian's holding up a Noah's Ark book with Donald Trump, presumably as Noah. Did you pay money for this? Please
no, they sent me a review copy, and I made a review video, so I'll put a link to it. Go watch my review. So
there was this guy Noah, right? A amazing guy, very successful in his field, very loyal. Had a great.
Okay. Anyways, that's enough of that. I play more of it in my review video, but it's an AI voice, and they have a new one. They didn't send it to me, but they have a new one now of AI Trump reading the Christmas story. And amazingly, like Noah turns out to be like a Donald Trump figure because God has chosen Donald Trump / Noah to save us.
Is Noah blonde on the cover there?
No, that's Trump.
Oh.
So
But
wait a minute.
he's still pretty white.
Noah wasn't the only human figure, the only male figure in the ark, according to that story. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, well, there were others. His sons.
Oh, that's right. So it was Donald Trump, one of Noah's sons. I'm trying to figure out how to square Trump's presence on the ark with the story.
Yeah. Maybe he's an angel.
Oh my gosh, that would give me nightmares. Oh my gosh.
I'm being a moment here of just existential angst. It's like stuff like this makes me wonder, what are we doing as pastors, right? It's like if this is the headwinds we are facing of trying to teach people the Christian story and get them to live the Christian life, it's like it feels almost impossible with stuff like this out there that's just, it's overwhelming.
So maybe we'll end our episode hopefully with some better resources. Please don't go buy that book, anyone. But we like to end our episodes, our conversations with something that we have been consuming, be it a book, a movie, a podcast, whatever that we want to lift up and to recommend. So, Beau, why don't you tell us something positive that you've enjoyed lately?
I'm just flabbergasted by this. So I don't know how you all do this. Back to the tech conversation. My wife and I, we tend to cycle through streaming services because, the streaming era was supposed to save us all money, but in reality it doesn't, because you got to give everybody $12.99 a month or whatever it is, and you have like 8 streaming services. So we tend to watch one for a month, binge some things, shut it off, go to the next one, and kind of cycle through to keep costs under control. And so we've recently resubscribed to Netflix, and there's been this wonderful documentary series called The Clubhouse that's called The Year with the Boston Red Sox. And so basically these camera and producers and film people have embedded themselves with the Boston Red Sox and watched a 162-game season unfold. And it's just a wonderful behind-the-scenes look. I'm always fascinated by, how do these elites actually live their lives? And it's a really kind of unvarnished look at that, and you see their struggles, and you understand that they're humans like the rest of us. It's probably 10 hours of actual stuff that you get to watch through. I mean, it's not just an hour and a half thing; it's a series. And so, I'm a huge baseball fan. It's really neat to see. Not a Red Sox fan, still not a Red Sox fan, but glad for this series to have introduced some humanity into the players. And I will say, I'm not one to show up at the game and ridicule and boo players. But hearing how they take that when they have fans just screaming at them from the stands and how personal that can get sometimes, we all should be better humans, right? We all need to be better humans.
Angela?
Yeah. Well, I've been homesick for the last week, so I've had a lot of time. The most recent thing I'll mention that I watch it on TV, other than, my trash Bravo shows, which are great for human life commentary. I watched a documentary on Hulu on the Moonlight Bunny Ranch and the Cat House, supposed documentary of a brothel in Nevada. And Dennis Hoff, who ran that brothel and kind of got the documentary going on HBO, which the documentary really ended up being like a puff piece promotion for the brothels. It didn't expose what was really happening as far as drug use and abuse and mistreatment of women and sexual slavery. Really great, uplifting Christmas topics. But Dennis Hoff called himself the Trump from Pahrump and ran for political office, ended up being posthumously elected. He won the Republican nomination as a brothel owner, campaigning as a brothel owner, comparing himself to Trump. So it's just a vital piece of social commentary and looking at the ways that people take on this mantle of Trumpism in all different kinds of contexts. And then also I've been listening to a couple of books, audiobooks. I listened to Invisible Child, which follows the story of a young girl who was growing up in homelessness and poverty in New York. And I thought it was a really great, lifelong, expansive nuanced take exploring all the different dimensions of poverty and what goes into it, and through a really human lens. And then I'm currently listening to a book called Everything is Tuberculosis, and it's talking about the disease of tuberculosis and how the social dimensions of that disease contribute to its perniciousness. So good times.
I mean, when things are so bleak that tuberculosis brightens your day, it says something about where we're at.
Yeah. Right. So I was worried. You mentioned Netflix, and I was really worried that you were going to steal the one that I was going to do. But I have a different Netflix series that we just enjoyed watching, and that was Death by Lightning. And this tells the story of the assassination of James Garfield. And it is just, it's high quality, well done, and it's amazingly cast. Just some phenomenal stars of that era of politics. You get the rise of his assassin and his political rise, and their lives coming, together with a very, violent and tragic end. And of course, I know what you're trying to say, because the reason why I was afraid you were going to take it is James Garfield is, of course, our only president who is an ordained minister, and in what denomination?
Yes, my favorite trivia question, right? He was a member in what has become the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. He was a president of one of our colleges. He was a congressman. He, of course, obviously became president, but he was very influential in the life of our tradition. And yeah, my favorite trivia question.
Yeah, you'll love it. And like I said, all the roles are cast so well, but Bradley Whitford, who I always love as James Blaine, is just such a fantastic character. But I highly recommend it. Well, Beau, Angela, thanks for joining us. This was a fun conversation on some fun and not fun issues happening in the world. And we'll come back together again in 2026 to chat some more.
Merry Christmas.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Angela. Talk to you all soon.